YouTube Vintage Restores. Across the dial here, Brian. I'm just taking a break from the shop. June, July, August this year, I've actually been really busy. Sourcing new stuff to restore, working on it. And my shop, you know, you get the soldering iron going, the lights on, TV going, whatever you got. It gets pretty warm in there, and it's been very warm everywhere. It's been in the middle of a heat wave, so I'm just taking a break, taking the rest of the weekend off. This restoring business, I figure that if you look at what you make from this, you end up with about $2 an hour. So there's another reason you're doing it, and that's because you just love vintage audio, tube radios, turntables, vinyl. So, you know, that balances it out, makes it worthwhile. But I just thought, oh, the hat and the sunglasses, just for fun. You know, I hardly ever wear the hat. I don't like hats, especially baseball hats. They wreck my hair. Anyway, yesterday I was working on a restoration. I'm doing it's a Heathkit AA14 amp, 1965, early solid state. And there's a few capacitors. The way this thing's put together, there's 4 capacitors that are hidden underneath the selector switch. Very hard to get at. You either have to unsolder the entire selector switch to get at the capacitors, or somehow use your skills. And this is one thing I learned over the years. You know, somebody would say, how am I supposed to get at, you know, when I was doing car stereo years ago and auto electric, how are you supposed to get that starter out? How are you supposed to pull that deck out? And we used to come up with these things. And I remember in particular, the mid-70s Camaro and Firebird, that style, some of them used to have an AM/FM 8-track radio. Well, the chassis behind the radio plate, the original Delco, was huge. And we swear they built the car around these things. Anyway, one of these would come in and somebody would be getting an AM/FM cassette or AM/FM CD player, maybe even a subwoofer system. We had to build them from scratch. And be like, how do I get this thing out? You got to take, and in the factory service manual, you had to take the console out and the lower dash. You had to take this strut out, this reinforcement. And we came up with a thing called the reef. And I say to the guys, hey, I need 2 guys to reef on a dash for me. And we came up with this thing. You took the knobs off the radio, the 2 nuts, loosen the support on the back, and 1 guy in each seat, and then another guy in the back seat, and you'd reach between the 2 seats, and you'd go reef, and they'd grab underneath the dash and pull on it as hard as they could, and it would actually move out, and then you'd push the 2 shafts of the radio through the holes, and the radio would go plunk and land on the hump in the middle of the floor. And then, okay, let go. I mean, the way those cars were made, they had a lot of metal in them. You could easily push that dash back to where it was. Oh, we used to do stuff like that. Anyway, I was just working on this Heathkit the other day, and my wife was out in the other room. She was working on something, and I'm doing brain surgery on a Beaver here. That was another saying we used to have. You know, you'd have a really difficult install, or if you were working on the repair bench that day, you know, a deck or whatever you're working on was very difficult to work on. And it came out of a Canadian Air Farce sketch. This was a radio show before it was a TV show, the Royal Canadian Air Farce. And it was a comedy show. And they had one skit, this is going back to the early 70s. And they did this game show where you had to do things to win a prize. And one of them was to do brain surgery on a beaver for 10 seconds. I remember hearing this skit. We were listening to CBC radio in the car traveling somewhere, and they were doing this, and of course, like the sound, like it's all sound effects because it's radio, and it's like, all right, hand me that saw, hand me that drill, are you almost done? Almost done. You have successfully performed brain surgery on a beaver. In 9 seconds, you win the prize. Thinking it was all imagination. That phrase. So one day I said it in the shop. It was going back years ago. I said it's brain surgery on a beaver getting that cassette tape out of this deck, and all the guys laughed because they had all heard the skit sometime, and we had the funniest sayings. different names for cars. In the car stereo shop back in the 80s, we weren't allowed to swear in front of customers. You know, the manager of the store was always be polite. I don't want any yelling or cursing come out of the shop. And I remember one time, this Cutlass Supreme came in, and they're getting 2 6x9 speakers in the back, and one of the installers, he opens the trunk, and it's filled with auto parts. And we were in a, you know, like, we had to keep these cars rolling. And he was like, okay, I'm just going to throw some blankets on and lie on top of the auto parts. And I would hand him stuff in. So anyway, he's working, he goes, ow, something's stinging my back. Ow! And I help him out of the trunk, and his shirt has got this stain on it, and his skin's red. A car battery was in the trunk of this car on his side, dumping the acid out. And he happened to lie in it. And it was so funny, he wanted just to curse his brains out. He's going, oh fog, oh fire truck, oh fish heads. These things while he's dancing around. I got this shirt off him, and I went and I sprayed a water bottle on him. And he was okay, but we used to come up with these sayings, you know, like, if you had to get something off your chest, we'd use make believe words, you know, like, oh, but blah 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 blah. Be like, I get what you're saying, of course. But anyway, going back to working on that Heath kit, sometimes you run into, and this is one of the reasons I restore rather than repair. People all the time ask me, and they'll say, hey, I've got such and such from 1962. I'd like you to get it working for me. And I'd say, you know what? I don't do get it working. 1962 radio, 1962 turntable, if it hasn't been touched and sitting in Grandma's attic, it needs a complete restoration. I've touched on this before. And it's the same. Anyway, I bought this Heath kit amp a few weeks ago. I got the tuner going, and the amp showed a lot of promise. It's the interesting thing, and this has happened to me 3 times on that series of Heath kit. You get a vintage one, it's sitting around, you recap it, get it working. There's one driver transistor that was bad, replaced it. I'm actually listening to it on the bench. It's like, hey, this is going to work out great. I'm going to put it back together and try it in my main system. I just swung my chair around. I was working on the computer, and I just hear this, and the audio stops. I'm like, oh, blown output. I'm going, oh, it's one of these. Primary winding in the power transformer, shorted out. And I don't know why it happens. It's a early Heath kit solid state, the power transformer they used in them, and it was a Hammond by the look of it, which was really high quality. They short out, and I've tried taking them apart and fixing the windings. So here you end up. If you were fixing this for a customer, and you put all these parts into it, you get that far, and it's like, uh-oh, now it needs a power transformer. Good luck finding this. People will not want to spend the money. They'll say, well, it blew in your shop, and then you end up losing sometimes hundreds of dollars on one of these things. In this situation, I thought, you know what? These Heath kit parts are very valuable. I'm not going to look for another power transformer because it's a slimline case, very hard to find one. And I thought, you know what? Okay, I'm going to keep it for parts. It's got lots of great stuff in it, potentiometers, all kinds of hardware. Just the switches and controls are worth the money. And that's, you know, sometimes you got to say, okay, on this one, it's a parts machine. And I've had that happen twice this week. So a tube radio that I bought at a flea market, I opened the thing up, and it was completely butchered inside. I mean, parts cut out of it, IF transformers gone, and the outside of it, I mean, it needed a little, you know, refinishing on the wood cabinet, but it was 25 bucks. It had actually a good tube set in it. Somebody had put a bunch of new old stock tubes in it because they all tested way into the green. Started working on stuff, started replacing stuff, and then they gave up on it, and they left their tubes in the socket. Plus it had a great electromagnetic speaker. But anyway, next time you're working on something that's impossible, and you get it done and say, hey, brain surgery on a beaver. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye.